Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to episode 2 of LunchBytes. This is
back.
exciting. Yes. Been 2 weeks already. That's
This is exciting.
Absolutely.
It feels like yesterday.
It does. It does. But so long ago as well. And I'm
Already.
sure the next one will come around very quickly. But here we are. So we should probably kick off with our usual update stuff.
Yes, we shall kick off. So before we get anywhere, we'll just hop right over to our code of conduct. And so we want everyone, as you're watching this episode, to be aware of others, be welcoming and respectful, especially in the comments section, be understanding of differences, be patient and friendly, be open to all questions and viewpoints, and be kind and considerate to others. If you would like more information about our code of conduct, you can visit aka.ms/events code of conduct. Alrighty, and then after that, also want to note that this is going to be this show is going to be available with live captioning, and then on Learn TV and YouTube. And then when this is available on demand later, we'll have it transcribed. So be sure to use that selection below as you're watching this.
Excellent.
And that is it for the accessibility slides.
Perfect. So I guess then.
So since we're just still kicking off, and this is only episode 2.
That's it.
Do you want to do a quick reminder to everyone what LunchBytes is, Chris?
For sure. Thanks, Steph. So I guess LunchBytes really has come from this idea of this lunch and learn concept. We have a number of our specialists and cloud solution architects who run those with customers, and we figured why not centralize some of that, get it out in the open, and benefiting many different customers all at once. So we're bringing together all of these specialists, all of this expertise, so that you can have a nice, easygoing lunchtime where you can go ahead, tune in, and learn something new. And we'll be giving you these kind of content updates every couple of weeks. We've got a bit of a schedule now in place for the next few weeks or so. But we'd always love to know if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see on the show. So lunchbytes@microsoft.com, if there is, get in touch with us, because we're always keen to hear what it is you want to see here, because this is the reason we're doing this show. It's all for you, and want to make sure that interaction is there as well, and you're getting what you want out of it. But yeah, bringing the experts in and having a nice chilled out lunchtime. That's the idea here.
I know. Eventually, it's like I'll start timing when I actually eat lunch to when we actually start streaming this. So we'll get that nailed. Really quick, let's do a bit of round of intros, since, again, episode 2. I'm Steph Rogers, and I'm the Developer Engagement PMM over here with the awesome Chris Reddington.
Hello, Chris Reddington. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and I focus in what's known as the digital and app innovation space. So think about all of those platform as a service options, things like GitHub, DevOps, Power Apps, all of those types of areas are typically the services I focus on. So excited to be here again today with you all, and going to be looking at an interesting topic today. So we'll come on to that topic a little bit later. Again, given the apps focus, one that I'm interested in and passionate about, and we'll be learning plenty from as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, I'm very much new to this myself, versus you also have Chris, who's like a seasoned expert. So we're going to have a bunch of different perspectives to share from both of our sides, especially in the Q&A. So speaking of Q&A, as you go through this entire session, we'll want to be answering your questions, especially at the end with our amazing speaker, who's coming up in a little bit. And so be sure to throw them in the chat, and we'll get to your questions as soon as we can.
Excellent. And I guess then in terms of what is coming up over the next few weeks or so, we'll reveal at the end of this session what our next episode is going to be. But a lot of the topics right now are very app focused. So we've got things like cloud native and thinking of some of those subject areas like Azure Arc. We've got things like monitoring and how you do that in a distributed world. We might even have something coming up on Power Ups as well. So definitely stay tuned because we'll be drip feeding some of this as we go through. And again, if there is anything you want to see, LunchBytes at Microsoft.com is where you can let us know so we can make sure we bump those up in the list and are giving you exactly what you want.
Absolutely.
So then let's move on to the next segment, I think, which
let's
is
do it.
our developer news radar. So here we go. So we mentioned this one last time. It's something we're going to experiment with, see if it's useful for folks. And if it is, we'll keep it. If not, we'll maybe do something different and experiment and try it out. But we're just going to run through what's happened since our LunchBytes session previously, what news there is, etc. So we'll kick off with the Azure blog first off. And this was one which actually caught my eye because Azure Cosmos DB, when you think about any applications, you don't really have applications without data anymore. And I think we're seeing lots of interest in Azure Cosmos DB because of that global scale that it brings. So the fact that there's now an update here in preview for Microsoft Defender for Azure Cosmos DB was really interesting. Security is top of mind for everyone. So this felt like a really relevant one just to bring onto the show and highlight for folks that if you're working with Cosmos DB, maybe this is something you want to go and explore. So that's on the Azure blog. Go and take a look at that one. As always, the Azure Cost Management team do a great roundup every month in terms of what they've announced. So you can see here some of the latest updates here in terms of anomaly detection for subscriptions, cost management labs and what's new, being able to save money with Azure, which of course everyone wants to save money. So I'm definitely interested in those tips as well. So again, the cost management and billing team have you covered there. DDoS protection response guide. Again, the world we're in, cybersecurity, super important. There's some really interesting facts actually on this post here. Back in October, Microsoft reported a 2.4 terabit per second DDoS attack that was mitigated. And then in November, another attack with 3.47 terabits per second. I can't even think of the scale of some of those numbers that Microsoft are protecting against there. So some great advice and tips there on protecting against those types of threats. So Azure blog always has you covered there with some of those broader updates. But as a bit of a reminder, again, there is also the Azure updates page as well. And the Azure updates really focuses on some of those incremental changes to the platform rather than the larger scale updates, if you like. So one of them I actually caught from one of my colleagues, John, is all about WordPress enhancements for app service. And this is something I've seen quite a bit of interest in over the years, running WordPress type sites on Azure. It looks like there's now a preview for some more optimized capabilities and performance enhancements for WordPress. So if you've got a WordPress site, might be worth investigating there for you. So the team has you covered there. Maybe WordPress isn't your thing. Maybe you're in the cloud native space. Maybe you are using Red Hat OpenShift. Well, good news. There is now generally available support for OpenShift 4.9. So go and check that out as well. And following hot off the heels from our session last time with API management, there are now some enhancements here for SOAP and XML request and response validation as well from the policy perspective. So again, lots of great enhancements happening in that space. And there's many more different things. We've got to try and consolidate those for the show, but those are just a few highlights here. Sticking with that. Yeah.
Just a quick list. If you missed last week's episode, you can still go check it out at aka.ms/lunchbytes, and you can look, hopefully, especially on YouTube, it'll be on demand for you to check out.
Perfect. Excellent. And then the last bit around Azure here is another blog here, but it's from the Azure App Service team directly. So we'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes here as well. And we'll bring that up on screen in a sec. But this is a blog post directly from the Azure App Service team and is one of those hidden gems, actually. So maybe worth checking that out. They give a bit more of a detailed view on the WordPress on App Service public preview here as well. As always, Azure DevOps blog, there's some great updates here from the community, as well as the Azure LunchBytes episode from Jay Gordon and team, particularly around static web apps, which is close to my heart, Stream Analytics as well. And then, of course, I'm wearing a hoodie, so we've got to mention it. GitHub, there's a few interesting updates from the changelog. In particular, some enhancements to GitHub issues that you might want to go and check out. Code spaces pre-builds to help you get those code spaces up and running even more quickly, discussion and answers in discussions, and then creating branches for issues as well. So lots of innovation happening there. And I think that covers our developer news radar for these last 2 weeks. Steph.
All right, what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and add all those links in the comments. So that way you can look at those, bookmark them, read them later if you'd like to dive a bit deeper. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think we're now at the stage then where we get to bring in our wonderful speaker for today.
Oh, I'm so excited about her. Everyone, welcome the amazing Purna Bhavali.
Hello, welcome everyone.
How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Good, good.
Excited
maybe
for
with
the
some
day.
Intros then. Yeah, maybe with some intros, Purna, just to let people know who you are and some of your background there.
Yeah, I'm Purna Bhavapalli. I work as a cloud solution architect in Microsoft. I'm working the same team as Chris, focused on digital and application innovation. I work with customers on their integration needs using Azure integration services, mainly to address their current challenges and even to migrate their existing implementations onto Azure. That's part of my role. And today, I think I would be talking about Logic Apps and DevOps for Logic Apps Standard.
Excellent. Excellent. So really interesting topic here, actually. I guess last time we talked about DevOps for API management and that side of the integration space. But here we're going to be talking about Logic Apps. And for anyone who's maybe used Logic Apps in the past, they might be thinking, I tried DevOps back then with Logic Apps. It wasn't the most easiest of things for me to kind of work with. But actually, there's been quite a lot of enhancements and changes and new functionality in this space. So what we're going to be talking about today, how people can build this quickly, highly scalable integration environments using Azure Logic Apps. So I think no need to waste any time here. So Purna, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Yeah, as Chris highlighted, there has been a lot of journey on Logic Apps, and especially with the new runtime, there has been changes with the way it runs and where you can run it as well. So let's go and see today. Yeah, DevOps for Logic Apps. Before I pitch into the slides, what is Logic Apps? As most of you know, Logic Apps is a cloud-based platform. It's used for creating and running automated workflows, which integrate your apps, data, and services and systems, be it either on-prem, cloud, or hybrid. With this platform, you can quickly deploy highly scalable integration solutions for your enterprise and business-to-business scenarios. Moving on to the slides. Developing Logic Apps is effortless. It has a powerful visual interface that allows users to pick up and start building in a matter of minutes, simplifying the integration experience in the comprehensible blocks, which you could see in the picture here. It's available on most popular platforms, including Visual Studio, VS Code, and the Azure portal. Logic Apps is a general purpose workflow engine that's resilient and ties in effortlessly with the rest of Azure. Most importantly, with other parts of the integration offerings, such as functions, API management, event grid, and service bus. With any integration solution, the key is connecting to legacy, modern, and cutting edge systems across cloud, on-prem, and hybrid environments. Logic App has support for 400 plus connectors out of the box, few being like Azure Services, Cosmos, SQL Server, and Microsoft offerings like Dynamics, and third-party platforms like IBM DB2, Salesforce, and SAP. And these are few. There are many more connectors which are in that 400 plus connectors. And it also supports custom connectors to connect to any REST or SOAP endpoint, or if the customer wants to build their own connectors to address the needs, or if they think that one of the 400 connectors is not solving that challenge. All this connection information, which is used in the Logic App workflow, is stored securely and encrypted at rest. So it's taken care for the customers. Their connection information is safe. So we know how the Logic Apps is designed and what are the connectors available. Then how do you run these Logic Apps? There are two runtime options to choose to run the workflows designed. Consumption runs on Azure only in a multi-tenant and you pay per action. The other option is standard. This is the newer runtime. It runs pretty much anything, including the new Azure Arc. It's a single tenant and it's built for whatever the container it's running in. This, of course, carries some major advantages such as testing locally, control over where it can run, and continuous integration. And it also, I think, helps the customers to decide where to run and pay only for what they are using. Moving on to the next slide. Diving deep into the new runtime. Logic App Standard can be made to run stateless. The difference between the stateless and stateful primarily revolve around whether it saves the inputs and outputs between each action. Stateful workflows save the state of the workflow, while stateless workflows operate without. You might recall that acquiring and locking resources for storage operations is one of the greatest limiting factors in high volume computing. Stateless workflows open the door to using Logic Apps in high performance environments. There are some features that are not available when working stateless, such as some webhooks and no run history by default, but you can gain tremendous speed and scalability. Workflows that are prime candidates for running stateless would be ingesting IoT data or implementing REST APIs where vast volumes of information is being processed quickly, and it isn't mission critical if a single request fails. The new runtime also supports VNet and private endpoints to connect to resources securely. It works with application insights for holistic application monitoring, and it has a significant improvement in the high performance of the workloads. Let's see what is the...
Excellent. And just to jump in on that, Pona, as well, by the way, there was one bullet point in there on that previous slide where you talk about being able to run anywhere. And that's really powerful, actually. It's something that wasn't really possible with Logic Apps in the previous kind of mode, the consumption tier. And something maybe as a bit of a tease for the next episode, we have another of our colleagues coming on to talk about Azure Arc for applications as well. So it all forms part of this same kind of idea that your cloud native applications, your applications should and could be able to run anywhere. And this is what some of these innovations are starting to open up here as well, which is really powerful.
Yes, I could totally agree there, Chris. I think Logic App Standard, now it is enabled to run on like Arc or the AKS or a Docker, Kubernetes. So like anywhere and pretty much everywhere, I would say. So which is a major thing. And yeah, it enables customers to do more and decide where to do what they want to do. Moving on to the DevOps model. In the consumption model, there was no local development or debugging experience. In standard model, you can develop in Visual Studio or on the Azure portal. The Logic App standard resource type is powered by the redesigned single tenant Azure Logic Apps runtime, which uses Azure Functions runtime. This runtime is now portable and you can execute it in your local development environment, meaning you get through local debugging and being able to run and execute these workflows locally before you go and push them up to Azure. It uses workflow definition language behind the scenes, and Logic Apps is less like application as code, but more configuration as code. Again, in consumption model, workflows lived in the infrastructure as code template, which meant application developers must be infrastructure aware. With standard, where you can get separation of concerns because all your workflows live within an application package. And that application package or project is much like if you have developed something along lines of Azure Functions, whereby you have a Visual Studio Code project and you have got multiple different folders with all your functions in it. In this case, instead of having functions, you have multiple workflows within your Logic App project. In terms of deployment, standard Logic App application package can be zipped up or it can be containerized in a separate pipeline to the actual ARM deployment itself. Again, with the standard, parameters can be defined both at deployment time or at runtime using app settings and parameter files. By using app settings, you can dynamically call Key Vault or you can change app settings on the fly without needing to do a whole new infrastructure redeployment. This is again one of the new features, dynamic settings, which is a major advantage here. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, when you open, I think it was, okay. There is a Logic App project behind. Okay. When you open a standard project in Visual Studio, you'll see artifacts folder, which has schemas and maps. It's the previous slide, just that the other one is blocking it. It was a two-part slide. Okay. No,
I'm not able to do the two-part slide, it looks like on my end. Is that all right?
And that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just explain the Visual Studio Code structure. I think, yeah, I think later, if possible, I'll try to share that image. Okay.
Sounds good.
What happens is when you open a Visual Studio Code project, in the standard structure, it has schemas and maps as part of the artifacts folder, which was not the case traditionally. This is great if you don't want to run it in an integration account because of the cost. Artifacts are now built into workflow standard plan, so you don't have to pay on top of that to store maps and schemas. Within the Logic App process itself, when you reference these maps and schemas, it's not making an external call. It's just going to its neighboring folder and getting the map. You then get multiple workflows within one Logic App project, much like you would have multiple functions within a function app project. There are recommendations anyway on how many workflows you should have per logic app. It would be pretty much similar to the functions recommendations. You do see some degradations if you put too many in one resource. So the best practice here is grouping your logic apps or group your workflows within a logic app based on your needs and processing loads. And you could see the workflow design time file, which is local again to the Visual Studio or VS Code project you're developing using. This designer runs locally and you don't have to push that up to your source control when you want to package this. Then the main one to call out in the for files section is the JSON connections. JSON stores the metadata for all the connections and actions that you define in your workflow. And this will be more important as you start using built-in and managed connectors when you start building your workflow. And these connections have to be exported and deployed to various environments. In the overall structure, if you see, it looks like there are application package which contains multiple workflows, connections.json metadata, parameters, maps, and schemas. All of these are bundled together into the one zipboard container artifact. That is the left part of the diagram. Moving on to the right, which is the infrastructure. Automating the infrastructure for standard logic app to run on, there are a couple of different components that you will need to represent in your ARM template. So your application itself will run on a logic app. This logic app needs to be hosted somewhere, and this is represented by a workflow standard plan. You get standard plan 1, 2, and 3, or you can choose to run it on an ASUI 3 as well. Logic Apps is inherently a stateful service. Even if you are running stateless, you will need to associate some sort of state store with it. There are two options for state store. Default is a storage account, and the other option is to run your state in SQL. This feature is in public preview currently. If you're running any of the managed connectors, those will be hosted as a separate Azure resource. So those need to be represented in your ARM template, and something that is new, particularly with the standard experience. Logic App has an automatically enabled system assigned managed identity. This identity differs from the authentication credentials used for creating a connection. At runtime, Logic App uses this identity to authenticate its connections through Azure Access Policies. So this managed identity here is for API connection. And then again, you define your own identity for connecting to the service or the end systems. So if we could see here, we have looked at what the Logic App application will look like. That typically will go through its own CI/CD pipeline, which could be bundled up and deployed. And we have looked at what we'll need to define in your infrastructure to go ahead and define and deploy those infrastructure templates in a typical infrastructure as code pipeline. Moving on to the next slide. Parameters. There are two different ways you can parameterize in Logic Apps. You can either use the parameter file, kind of works the same as parameter files in ARM templates. It's a separate file. You put all your parameters in it. Or you can have app settings. If you're familiar with functions or web apps, it's the exact same concept. They are outside your Logic App application, and you can dynamically change them on the fly at runtime. So typically use parameters if you're more familiar to consumption, because it's the same UI experience through the workflow designer. whereas app settings are accessed via code. If you have any workflow-specific parameters or environment variables that will change over time, parameters are great for that. If you do have anything like a certain secure key that you need to reference, you can reference an app setting from parameters, and your app settings can reference key vault. So there is a lot of mixing and matching you can do using the combination of app settings and parameters. So what this look in practice, you will have your workflow specific parameters in your parameter file. Then you can edit alongside your workflows in VS Code. And then anything that typically needs to be stored in Key Vault or will change or recycle over time are things that are generated in the infrastructure or code pipeline work well in app settings. So this is how the static parameters and dynamic parameters can be defined using parameters and app settings. A demo, today we'll be seeing how we can go from zero to hero in creating a complete end-to-end DevOps pipeline for Logic Apps standard. This uses the sample which is available on GitHub. Using this sample, I have demoed the Azure DevOps model, but the same could be done for the GitHub as well, setting up the GitHub pipelines. If I take the pause here, this is the repo we have, which I have forked from the Azure Logic Apps, and I have used. I'm trying to pause the video. Okay, sorry, slightly going back. Yeah, this is the video and Azure DevOps sample. This is the one I have used for setting up the DevOps pipelines. And that is now part of my repo in Azure DevOps. And I have opened up the same thing in my Visual Studio, which is like for my development environment. I'm using VS Code here. And if the Visual Studio project structure, which I was trying to define earlier and which the image was behind the scenes in the slide, it looks like this. It has a deploy and logic app, and the logic app under it has all the workflows and artifacts and everything defined in case you are using them. And I have two logic apps here, workflows, basically, one for event trigger and event processor. Event trigger is to trigger the workflow. I'm using a recurrence timer in this scenario. And the event processor is another workflow which goes and creates a blob. So event trigger just invokes that workflow. So coming back to the code structure, the pipelines are predefined. So if you are using the repo, there are pipelines for infrastructure as code, CI and CD. And there is a file for pipeline variables, which has all the parameters where you need to feed in your values. In this case, I have defined my region and resource group, all that. And let's see how we can create the pipeline using that existing pipeline YAML files. Choose Azure Repos Git, and I have chosen my repo there. And then I'm using existing Azure YAML file, and I pick the infrastructure as code pipeline. So in this part, I'm going to deploy infrastructure as code to the Azure portal. And we could see what all resources would be deployed. Yeah, before that, the one key thing to remember is the service connection, which integrates your connectivity between DevOps and Azure portal. So you need to create one service connection and provide the name of the service connection in the file here in your YAML. So now I have my YAML loaded. I'll run the pipeline. So you could see it's creating the pipeline, and soon we should have it up and running. So before it deploys to my deployment, I have put a gate here which asks me for the permissions, and I go and say approve. Just the control to make sure they should make sure it's only approved artifacts are deployed, basically. So once that is clicked, the deployment has triggered in the now, and it is deploying the resources. This would take few minutes normally because it's recorded. Yeah, deployment is complete. So if I go back to the portal, that's the resource group I created. And in the resource group, all the infrastructure for Logic App is deployed. Basically, it has the Logic App standard plan and the Logic App storage account, the connection, and all the resources, basically what are needed for this project. And if I click on the workflows now inside the Logic App, you could see it's all empty. There are no workflows here, but that is what we are going to deploy as part of the application package. So any changes to your workflow are separated from your infrastructure deployment. Going back, now I'll create another pipeline for build and running the Logic App workflows. So yeah, let's choose creating a new workflow which builds first the application package. Once the build is complete, we'll create another deployment pipeline which will runs up and deploy the resources into the Logic App which was created before as part of the infrastructure pipeline. Yeah. One key thing to notice here was this pipeline needs a parameter for the build pipeline. The outputs of those build pipeline are being deployed here if you are using the GitHub repo sample, basically. Again, before deploying, it needs to be approved. Is again one of the gates applied here, and by permitting that, the deployment triggers. And so see here, it's saying deploying Logic App workflows. That's all complete. Now, if you go back to the Azure portal and look at the resources, if you refresh, you could see the workflows are deployed. There is an event trigger and event processor workflow. The event trigger was deployed with the body as demo content. That's what we see here. And this initiating the event processor Logic App with the input parameter as demo content. And the event processor goes and creates a blob and uses the input parameter as the body. If I just go to the blob storage, after the deployment and the successful run, there should be a file. So we could see that file here, which says demo content. And going back from the VS Code, because I could use VS Code for my local development, debugging, and everything. And whatever the changes I have done, I can straight away push those changes into the Azure DevOps. And then from there, we use the pipelines again to deploy. So I'm trying to show that bit here. So I made a change into my pipeline in the workflow now. Instead of the demo content, I went and changed the parameter. Just for the demo purposes, I'm doing the demo, changing the parameter. But normally, you could be having the real scenarios where you're pushing your changes and the workflows are getting deployed to the portal. So when I do that change, I should see the change here in the repo. And I say go commit. Once that change is committed, if we go to Azure DevOps, we should see that commit there. Yeah. Go to the repos, commits. Yeah, trigger input change. That was the change committed. Now, if we go back to the pipelines, because the infrastructure didn't change, only the workflow bit changed here. So I'm going to run my application pipelines to deploy that change. I'm running the build pipeline, and then it would be the deployment pipeline to deploy the change. The deployment is complete. If you go back to Azure portal and see the change workflows, we could see that the workflow has changed now. Just we are cross-verifying. And the change was deployed successfully and Logic App was triggered. Now, if I go to the blob storage again, I'm using Storage Explorer here to connect to my blobs storage and to see the blobs here in the storage. So when I refresh the Explorer, you can see the second file now, which is the change we deployed, and it has the input content as Logic App Standard DevOps, which was the one we deployed as the change. That's the demo. Going back to the slides, where the overview of the demo, if you look at it, I just want to brief the demo overview. Can we switch back to slides, please? Yeah. In these slides, if you are setting up the project on your Visual Studio, there are steps to be done. All those are explained in 1, 2, 3, 4, where you create your connections and then parameterize things, all that, which was all done. And the fifth bit was submitting the change, which we saw it. And the change, when the change has happened, we had 3 different pipelines. One was to deploy infrastructure, and other one was to build, and other to release. all this infrastructure we didn't run on the change. We ran only the build and deployment pipelines. And you can set up the same things, same pipelines to deploy to multiple environments by creating multiple parameter files in your repo. It's as simple as that. So hope this helped you to understand the end-to-end DevOps pipeline deployment for Logic Apps Standard. Thanks for joining me today. Any questions?
Awesome. No, I think really good session there, Purna. Thank you. And I think we've had some questions in the chat as well already.
Yeah.
Just looking back here. So
Yeah.
I think the first one which came up was more about Logic Apps in
Not that
general, which will be when it's possible for connecting from a Logic app to a firewall-enabled storage account within the same region.
And there's a question for you, Purna.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Logic App has connectors. Yeah, Logic App has connectors for connecting to, is it Azure Blob storage? Then there is a connector for connecting to that.
Yeah, and because we can now host Logic Apps on things like a
Yes.
Kubernetes cluster or whatever different backend platform, I think you should be able to do that kind of routing to a firewall-backed storage account now, right?
I think it depends on the scenario, like what they're using. Because with the standard, there are more options you could do. So you could run your Logic App in many places, and then where is your storage account and things.
Yep.
But I still think it's possible at high level. But if it's a case where they are seeing challenges, I would say reach out to us.
Yep.
We are there to help with more
Excellent.
details, please.
Excellent.
Awesome. The next question we have is, could we, using GitHub Flow, do the same as ADO does?
Yes, exactly. That's possible. The repo I showed the link, it has a GitHub templates for GitHub as well. So we could go and set that up, and it deploys the infrastructure separately. And there is another actions, GitHub Actions, which deploys the application. So there is a sample repo. Yeah, you could go and try it out. Or if there are any questions, again, feel free to reach out.
Awesome.
Just to paint the picture on that a little bit more, I guess the reason that it will work easily, whether it's Azure DevOps or GitHub, is because of the fact that the way that the Logic App standard works, it's based off the Azure Functions runtime, isn't it? So because it's using that same underlying runtime, it can use the same deployment mechanism. Because that's in place for Azure Functions on GitHub and Azure DevOps, both of those are possible deployment options. Have I understood that right, Purna?
Yes, exactly, Chris.
Perfect.
You are totally separating out the way infrastructure is deployed, and it is infrastructure is like any app you deploy, like function app or any app.
Gotcha. Excellent.
Very cool. And then the latest question is from Rahul. And how is this different from a general ADO or GitHub-based pipeline? Tacking on to the end of that.
I wouldn't say it is different. In a general scenario, you define how to deploy your application. Here with the Logic App, we are trying to separate out the concerns, basically infrastructure and the application. That is, you can deploy everything together in one pipeline, but we are trying to separate out the concerns and recommending the best practices there.
I think, Rahul, just to add on to your question there as well, if you tried this with the Logic App consumption mode, it wasn't built upon that foundation that I just mentioned a minute ago with the Azure Functions runtime. So the way that you would actually have to go and do that was deploy via an ARM template. And it worked, but there were some complexities that came with that, whereas this new standard model really simplifies that overall deployment. So now it looks like there isn't much of a a difference really between any other kind of DevOps pipeline that you're used to, because it is just deploying an application just like you're used to. It's got that kind of wrapper around it, and it makes it a bit nicer and a cleaner of an experience. And I think that's maybe where your question comes from, because now it looks like it is just any other kind of pipeline that you could go and deploy, which is great. So hopefully that helps just add a little bit more layer onto the question as well.
Awesome. If there aren't any more questions, Chris, do you have any questions? There was so much in there that I learned that I hadn't known before. So thank you so much, Porna. I have a lot to digest myself, though.
Exactly. No, lots to digest, I think. But a great session, and I think best way for folks to get going with that, as with any of these topics really, is just to get hands-on and try things out. I think we brought the link up a bit earlier there, but there we go, just right on cue. The resources that Purna has kind of linked to as part of the presentation as well. There's some great resources out there, like the GitHub repository, for example, some Microsoft learning paths, etc. Go ahead and check that link out down below. There we go, over here, because that will help you get going quickly and start trying some things out there.
Awesome. Thank you both. Thank you so much. And moving right along, if there are any questions, we'll definitely bring them up. But next up is we're going to be chatting a little bit about what's coming next, I believe.
Indeed, we certainly are.
Yes, we are. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we start off with some call to actions to begin with, don't we? So if we want to bring the slides back up here. So first off, we've mentioned it before, and we're going to keep mentioning some of these as well, just to make sure, in case you weren't aware, because there's so many great things available from the folks at Microsoft. We just want to shine a light on some of them, make sure you're aware. One of which being open hacks, and we'll link to a couple of those in a moment on the next slide, but also cloud skills challenges. If you haven't heard of either of those, if you're working with Microsoft already, get in touch with your account team, because they'll be able to get you aligned with the right people to get those in place. Open hacks are a great way to get hands-on skills with practical ways of learning some of this content, whereas cloud skills challenges are a nice gamified way of being able to learn some of this content. Bit of fun amongst your colleagues, being able to see who can learn the most in a certain period of time. And we all love learning, and there's a nice leaderboard and points mean prizes, right? And we all love that competition side. Useful resources, we've had the link up on the screen already, aka.ms/lunchbytes/s1e2/resources. But if there is anything else that you want to find out about, we're only an email away. Drop us an email at lunchbytes@microsoft.com, and you can go ahead and get in touch with us over there. And I think
really
we have one more slide. That's it.
Yep, we do have one question that just popped up. I'll make sure it gets covered. It's LJ. What is the best way to contribute to an open source project as a beginner DevOps practitioner?
Interesting question. I think, and I'd be interested in your perspective as well, Purna, on this. For me, it can always seem quite daunting to get involved in an open source project. It can seem quite scary because, I'm putting code out in the open. I'm kind of making myself quite vulnerable and showing the quality of my code. Just get started. Even if it's something just as simple as a documentation fix or raising an issue. There are loads of great projects on GitHub, for example, where they have tags like good first project or good first issue. And that's a good way to just get things going, building up that confidence, and then trying something out there.
Well said, Chris. Yeah, get started. Yeah, start contributing. We are always happy to look into the things, what's being contributed from community. And documentation is also another part where when you read something, if you find something, please support the change.
Awesome. Alrighty. Going back, I know we have, and if there's any other questions, we'll try to call them as we can, but we also have to wrap up a little bit. So community callouts. Actually, Chris, you're speaking tonight at an event, if I heard correctly.
I certainly am, yes. Midlands Azure User Group tonight. I'll be talking all about GitHub. But also one of our colleagues, John Mertzker, I think will be talking about Azure load testing as well. So going to be a really interesting session. So meetup.com, search for Midlands Azure User Group and come along and join us tonight, 6:30 p.m. UK time, we kick off.
Yes, absolutely. And then the link was just dropped below, the aka.ms/UK communities. If you're interested in joining a community, you're trying to find one in the UK where it's like, who's talking about the stuff I'm interested in? Where do I want to grow? Just now back to meeting people, whether that be hybrid, online, virtual, in person, whatever is most comfortable for you, that is available. And we also have some exciting news for in-person is that the Microsoft Reactor in London has reopened for community groups. So if you, your group, the community that you're a part of want to meet back in person and want to take a trip to London, please reach out to Reactor LDN@Microsoft.com. They are so excited to get bookings back in for in-person meetups.
And I'm so excited to actually be at an in-person meetup, right? You know, having people that you can actually see when you're speaking with them and getting all of that energy and that networking. Very exciting times.
Me too. Oh, that'll be nice. Very exciting. All right. There we go. Perfect. And then again, if you want to find a local community or if you need help, feel free to reach out to us. We are always here to help and tag the communities around us that we love. Next up.
Yes, a very, very interesting and relevant session to this one, actually. So we've got another of our brilliant cloud solution architects coming on to the show in 2 weeks' time. So that will be March the 23rd, same time, same place. So we'll make sure that we update the aka.ms/LunchBytes link so you can go and find that easily enough. But we will have Tig Brennan coming to speak with us all about Azure Arc for application services. So when you think about that concept a little bit earlier, being able to run your Logic apps anywhere, whether it's on premises in another cloud, for example, Azure Arc for applications is really the driving force behind that. And I think Tig will be showing us a bit around app services and how we can go and deploy those anywhere. So should be a very exciting episode and a good follow on from this one. Moving away from DevOps next time.
But we sure love to talk about DevOps. And speaking of which, if you have any questions or you want to highlight like something that you want to see in the series later on, please feel free to email us. I believe, yep, there it is, lunchbytes@microsoft.com. And if you have questions or things that you want us to cover, bringing in experts on, like the amazing Porna who came in. Thank you so much for joining us today, Porna. You were amazing and we loved your session and we learned so much. I know a lot of people were reacting in the comments as well. So be sure to send over your topics you want us to cover for sure.
Thanks, Steph.
Oh, and really quick, because we could not end this session without it is Chris's birthday tomorrow, everyone, and you can find Chris on Twitter. His Twitter handle is up in his little chat there. Be sure to drop him a little birthday wish for tomorrow. It is a big day, and we are also excited and happy to embarrass you. And happy birthday, Chris.
Thanks, everyone. As much as we were joking before going live, I didn't actually expect that to happen. So there we go. Thank you very much. Awesome. Good. So there we go. I think that is pretty much episode 2 completed there. And it's just amazing how quickly the time flies when we're on these.
I know. And Borna, we'll have to have you back again. Please, please, please. We would love that. And we'll be sure to let you all know what the upcoming episodes are. Stay tuned. I'm going to bring up the link again for tuning in next week. Save it in your calendars. Not next week. Sorry, in 2 weeks. Save it in your calendars. Here it is one more time. March 23rd, same time in 2 weeks. So put in your calendars. Tune in again live. We'll be here.
Excellent. So, folks, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you being here, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time on March the 23rd, same time, same place. See you then.
Goodbye.